the gambling news nobody asked for, with our dear host, Dr. Desi.
Welcome back to the gambling news nobody asked for, the only show where billion-dollar industries create public health problems and then commission studies to figure out what happened. Tonight, Congress accidentally noticed gambling addiction. Africa becomes gambling's newest gold rush. Britain's gambling industry earns enough money to buy several small countries. A public official allegedly turns taxpayer money into gambling money. And regulators discover that the internet is, unfortunately, still the internet. So basically, another completely normal week in gambling. A group of US representatives has introduced a bill calling for a federal investigation into gambling addiction. Wonderful timing. Sports betting has expanded across most of America, and now we are checking if it has consequences. That's not proactive. That's arriving at the crime scene after the Netflix documentary. The proposed bill would study the connection between legalized sports betting and public health. And look, I'm glad somebody finally asked. But sports betting ads are currently so common that children probably think odds are part of mathematics. You can't watch sports anymore. You watch gambling advertisements, occasionally interrupted by sports. At this point, every broadcast sounds like "Welcome to tonight's game. Before kickoff, here's 12 exciting ways to regret your financial decisions." And the industry always responds with, "We support responsible gambling." Which is a fascinating sentence. Because casinos supporting responsible gambling is a little like all-you-can-eat buffets supporting responsible overeating. One powerful psychological effect is normalization. The more often people see gambling, the less risky it appears. Advertising doesn't just promote products. It quietly changes what society accepts as normal. Next story. The gambling industry is becoming extremely excited about Africa. And whenever gambling executives become excited about region, I immediately become nervous about that region. Africa is being described as one of the industry's biggest future growth opportunities. Growth opportunity. Corporate language is really amazing because growth opportunity sounds much nicer than, ladies and gentlemen, fresh revenue. The industry is looking at mobile payments, smartphone adoption, internet access, and young population. Every gambling heatmap now looks less like market research and more like a military invasion plan. You can practically imagine executives standing around a giant screen saying, "Gentlemen, the revenue is advancing from the east." And the really impressive part, Humanity spent decades developing mobile technology, tiny supercomputers in our pockets, unlimited information, instant communication, and eventually someone looked at all that progress and said, "What if losing money become portable?" Humans often confuse familiarity with safety. When gambling becomes widespread, many people unconsciously assume it must be low risk. Popularity and safety, however, are completely different things. Next story, the UK gambling industry generated roughly £4.5 billion in just 3 months. 3 months. For context, that's roughly £50 million every single day. Every day. Weekends included. Christmas included. Even the days people swear they're quitting. And whenever gambling revenue reaches a new record, the industry celebrates like it cured a disease. Investors see growth. Executives see growth. Shareholders see growth. Nobody asks, where exactly did all that money come from? Imagine a quarterly earnings call. Congratulations, everyone! Millions of people collectively made poor financial decisions. And somehow that's a success story. At this point, gambling companies shouldn't publish earning reports. They should publish boss fight statistics. Large numbers create psychological distance. When people hear billions in revenue, they stop thinking about individual human experiences. The bigger the number becomes, the easier it is to forget that there are real people hidden inside it. A US park official has been accused of stealing more than $200,000. And according to investigators, gambling may have played a major role. And this story is where the comedy starts running out. Because nobody grows up dreaming of becoming Exhibit A in a gambling addiction case study. The allegations suggest public funds were misused over several years. So taxpayers essentially funded somebody else's gambling problem. That's not what people mean when they talk about public recreation. The scary part about addiction is that it rarely starts with catastrophe. It starts with confidence, then optimism, then denial, then panic, and eventually you're explaining your life choices to investigators. You never see that in gambling ads. No casino commercial ends with "place your first bet today" and potentially become evidence later. Addiction often escalates gradually. People don't suddenly abandon their values. They slowly cross boundaries they once believed were impossible. And that's what makes addiction so dangerous. Just one more time, just one more bet, just one more spin. And finally, Regulators versus the Internet. My favorite long-running comedy series. A growing debate continues around gamblers using VPNs to access markets and websites that aren't supposed to be available. Regulators, we've blocked access. Internet? Nah, no you didn't. The entire history of technology can basically be summarized as, please don't do that, and millions of people replying, watch me. The relationship between regulators and the Internet is basically Tom and Jerry, but with lawyers. Companies spend millions on identity checks, location checks, payment checks, security systems, and then some guy downloads one app. Suddenly, everybody's holding emergency meetings. The Internet remains undefeated. It has never encountered a rule without immediately trying to turn it into a tutorial. Restrictions can trigger what psychologists call reactance. When people feel a freedom is being limited, they sometimes become even more motivated to do the restricted behavior. That's one reason why access controls alone rarely solve addiction. So today we learned Congress finally noticed gambling addiction. Africa became gambling's newest frontier. Britain generated billions from betting. One addiction allegedly ended in fraud. And the Internet remains undefeated. But all 5 stories point toward the same pattern. More access, more normalization, more money, and eventually more people paying the price. The gambling industry always talks about growth, very rarely about consequences. This was the gambling news nobody asked for. See you next time.
Stay tuned, follow, and subscribe for more news nobody asked for.